The blood dripped from Virginia Zimmerman's broken nose onto the dusty floorboards of the trading post, and she knew without touching it that it would heal crooked. She had been struck before, but never like this. Her father's hand had come down hard and fast when she'd refused to marry the wealthy landowner he'd chosen for her. A man 3 times her age with breath that reeked of whiskey and wandering hands. The crack of bone had echoed through their small home on the outskirts of Castle Dome, Arizona, and Virginia had made her decision in that instant. She was 22 years old, and she would not spend another day under his roof. That had been 3 weeks ago, in the scorching August of 1874. 3 weeks of working every hour the trading post owner would give her, sleeping in a tiny room above the store that leaked sand through the ceiling boards, eating 1 meal a day if she was lucky. 3 weeks of watching her nose heal at an angle in the cracked mirror on the wall, the bridge bent slightly to the left, a permanent reminder of the price of freedom. Virginia wiped the blood away with her sleeve and continued stocking shelves. Old Mr. Peterson didn't like when she stopped working, and she needed every cent he paid her. The trading post smelled of leather and tobacco, dust and sweat, the scent of men who came down from the mountains and mines to buy supplies. She kept her head down and her eyes averted, knowing that a woman alone was viewed as either desperate or available, often both. The bell above the door chimed, and Virginia didn't look up. She heard the heavy footsteps, the jingle of spurs, the sound of someone large moving through the cramped space between barrels of flour and crates of ammunition. "Need supplies," a deep voice said, rough as gravel but somehow not unkind. Virginia straightened and turned, and her breath caught in her throat despite herself. The man standing before the counter was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway behind him. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered by sun and wind and years in the wilderness. But it was his eyes that held her, pale blue like ice on a mountain lake, watching her with an intensity that made her want to look away and step closer all at once. He wore buckskin clothing, well-made and well-worn, and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through the leather of his shirt, and his hands looked like they could break a man's neck or build a cabin with equal ease. "What do you need?" Virginia asked, proud that her voice came out steady. His eyes moved over her face, and she saw the moment he noticed her nose. She lifted her chin, daring him to comment, to say something cruel or pitying. Instead, he simply said, "Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition for a Sharps rifle, and whatever vegetables you have that won't spoil." Virginia nodded and began gathering his supplies. She could feel him watching her as she moved, but it wasn't the leering attention she'd grown accustomed to from most men who came through. This felt different, like he was trying to understand something, figure out a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. "That's $8.40, she said when she'd packed everything into 2 canvas bags. He counted out the money, his movements precise, and their fingers brushed when he handed over the coins. His hands were rough with calluses but warm, and Virginia pulled back quickly. "You are working here long?" he asked, and she noticed the slight accent in his words, something European she couldn't quite place. 3 weeks, Virginia said. "You like it? It pays." He nodded slowly, those pale eyes still studying her. "My name is Konrad Miller. I trap in the mountains, come down once a month for supplies. Virginia Zimmerman." "Virginia," he repeated, and the way he said her full name instead of shortening it to Ginny like everyone else made something warm unfurl in her chest. "Your nose, it is recent." Her hand flew up to touch it before she could stop herself, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Not pity, she realized. Anger. 3 weeks, she said again. The man who did this, he is still in your life. No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. And he won't be again. Konrad nodded once, seeming satisfied. He picked up his supplies with ease, the weight that would have staggered another man barely seeming to register. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. I will see you in a month, Virginia Zimmerman. It wasn't a question, and Virginia found herself nodding before she'd consciously decided to respond. The door closed behind him, and she stood there for a long moment, her heart beating faster than it should, her fingers still tingling where they'd touched his. That's Konrad Miller, Mr. Peterson said from the back room, making her jump. She hadn't realized he was listening. Came over from somewhere in Europe, maybe Germany or Austria, nobody knows for sure. Lives up in the mountains alone, been doing it for near about 5 years now. Good man, pays his debts, doesn't cause trouble. Heard he can track anything that walks or crawls, and he's strong as an ox. Seen him carry a full-grown buck on his shoulders like it was nothing. Virginia didn't respond, just went back to stocking shelves, but her mind was full of pale blue eyes and the way her name had sounded in that rough, accented voice. The days that followed were much the same as the ones before. Virginia worked from sunrise to sunset, saved every penny she could, and avoided the main street when the saloons were full. Castle Dome was a rough town, built on mining and trading and the hard men who did both. The Arizona heat was relentless, and water was precious. She'd learned to make a single pitcher last all day, to wet her lips instead of drinking deep, to move slowly to conserve energy. Her room above the trading post was an oven during the day and barely cooled at night. She lay on her thin mattress and thought about the mountains where Konrad Miller lived, wondering if it was cooler there, if the air smelled different, if the stars looked brighter away from the oil lamps and campfires of town. She thought about him more than she wanted to admit, about the way he'd looked at her nose without flinching or turning away, about the anger that had flashed in his eyes when he'd understood someone had struck her. Most men in Castle Dome wouldn't have cared, would have assumed she deserved it or that it was none of their business. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Virginia told herself she wasn't watching for him, wasn't listening for heavy footsteps and the jingle of spurs, wasn't disappointed every time the bell chimed and it was someone else. Then, exactly 4 weeks after their first meeting, he walked through the door. Virginia was helping another customer, an older woman who wanted to examine every spool of thread before making a decision, and she forced herself to finish the transaction before looking at Konrad. When she finally turned to him, he was standing patiently by the counter, his pale eyes already on her. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, a hint of something that might have been amusement in his voice. "Mr. Miller, the same supplies." "Yes, and also needles, good ones for leather work." She gathered everything, her movements practiced now, efficient. When she handed him the needles, he examined them carefully, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he tested the points and checked the eyes. "These are good," he said. "You know quality." "My mother taught me to sew," Virginia said before she could stop herself. "Before she died." Konrad's expression softened. "I am sorry, how long?" 10 years. I was 12. He nodded, understanding in his eyes that said he knew what it was to lose someone important. "Your nose, it has healed." "Yes," she touched it self-consciously. "Crooked but healed." "May I?" He gestured toward her face, and Virginia's heart began to pound. She should say no, should maintain proper distance, but instead she found herself nodding. Konrad reached across the counter, and his fingers were impossibly gentle as they traced the bridge of her nose, feeling the break, the angle where it had healed wrong. His touch sent shivers down her spine, and she had to concentrate on breathing normally. "It is not so bad," he said softly. "The crookedness, it makes you unique. You see here." His finger moved to the slight bump. "This is strength. This says you survived. This says you chose yourself." Virginia felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Everyone else had looked at her nose and seen damage, a flaw, something that made her less than she'd been before. Konrad Miller looked at it and saw survival. "Thank you," she whispered. His hand lingered on her face a moment longer, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, and then he pulled back. "You are working too hard. You are thinner than before. I'm fine. You are lying." There was no accusation in his voice, just statement of fact. "When do you eat?" "I eat." "When?" Virginia sighed. "Dinner, when I can afford it." Konrad's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "This is for you. I can't take your money. It is not charity. I am hiring you." "For what?" "I need shirts, 3 of them, and pants, 2 pairs. You said you can sew." "Yes." "I will pay you for the work, and for the materials. You will buy good food with some of this money, so you have the strength to do the work." Virginia stared at him. She knew what he was doing, and part of her wanted to refuse out of pride. But her stomach was so empty it hurt, and the thought of being able to buy eggs and bread and maybe even meat made her mouth water. "All right," she said. "I'll need your measurements." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she'd seen from him. "Tomorrow. I will come back tomorrow and you will measure me. Today, you will buy food and eat." He left the money on the counter and picked up his supplies. Virginia watched him go, her mind spinning, her face still warm where he'd touched her. That night, she ate beef stew and fresh bread at the boarding house down the street, and it was the best meal she'd had in months. She fell asleep with a full stomach and dreamed of mountains and pale blue eyes. Konrad returned the next day just after noon when the trading post was quiet and Mr. Peterson had gone home for his lunch. Virginia had purchased fabric and thread, good quality, and had her mother's old measuring tape ready. "Stand here," she said, gesturing to a clear space near the counter. Konrad obeyed, standing very still as she approached with the tape. Virginia had measured men before, but never one like this. She had to stand close to wrap the tape around his chest, and she could feel the heat coming off his body, smell the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to his skin. 48 inches, she murmured, writing it down. His shoulders were broader still. 52 inches, solid muscle that flexed slightly when he moved. She measured his arms, his waist, the length from shoulder to wrist, and with each measurement she became more aware of just how large he was, how strong, how carefully controlled his power was in her presence. "I need and seam," she said, and felt her face flush. "I will do it," Konrad said gently, taking the tape from her. He measured himself and told her the number, and she wrote it down with shaking hands. "It will take me 2 weeks," she said. "Maybe 3. "That is good. I will be in the mountains. When I come back, they will be ready." "Yes." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Virginia, there is a restaurant 2 streets over. The woman who runs it, Mrs. Chen, she makes good food. I have told her I am paying for you to eat there twice a day until I return. You can't do that. I already did." His eyes met hers, serious and intense. "You cannot sew if you are starving. This is business. This is more than business. Perhaps." He didn't deny it, "but you will still eat." "Yes." Virginia wanted to argue, but the thought of 2 meals a day, of not being hungry all the time, was too tempting. "Yes," she said quietly. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Good. I will see you in 2 weeks, Virginia Zimmerman." After he left, Virginia stood holding her measurements and tried to understand what was happening. Konrad Miller was essentially courting her, but in the most practical way possible, making sure she was fed and had work and was safe. It wasn't flowers or poetry or the romantic gestures she'd read about in the few books she'd managed to find. It was better, somehow. It was real. She spent the next 2 weeks sewing, her fingers moving through familiar patterns her mother had taught her. She made the shirts large and sturdy, with extra reinforcement at the shoulders and underarms where the fabric would strain against his muscles. She made the pants with room to move, knowing he'd need flexibility in the mountains. She put tiny, careful stitches into every seam and tried not to think about how it felt like an act of love. True to Konrad's word, Mrs. Chen fed her twice a day, generous portions of rice and vegetables and meat, and Virginia felt her strength returning. Her face filled out slightly, her hands became steadier, and she slept better at night. She also became aware that she was being watched. Several times, she caught sight of a man across the street, always at a distance, always disappearing when she looked directly at him. He was older, maybe 50, with a thick build and expensive clothes, and after the third time she saw him, she realized with a cold shock who he was: Richard Thornton. The man her father had wanted her to marry. Virginia mentioned it to Mrs. Chen during lunch on the 10th day. "I have seen him too," Mrs. Chen said, her face grave. She was a small woman, maybe 60 years old, who had come to America from China decades ago and opened her restaurant through sheer force of will. "He asks questions about you, where you work, where you sleep, if you have a man." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing, but he is persistent, and he has money, which means he has power." Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "You should be careful, Virginia. Men like that do not like to be refused." That night, Virginia lay awake in her sweltering room and tried not to be afraid. She had no one to protect her, no family, no husband, nothing but her own determination and the small knife she kept under her mattress. If Thornton decided to take what he wanted, there was little she could do to stop him. The thought made her angry more than scared. She had survived her father's fists and made her own way in a hard town. She would not be intimidated now. 2 days before Konrad was due to return, Thornton finally approached her directly. Virginia was closing up the trading post, and he stepped out of the shadows as she locked the door. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice oily and smooth, "we should talk. I have nothing to say to you. Your father and I had an agreement." "I was not part of that agreement. I did not agree. Your father speaks for you. Not anymore." Virginia tried to step around him, but he blocked her path. Up close, she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the way his eyes traveled over her body. Her stomach turned. "That crooked nose," he said, reaching out to touch it. Virginia jerked back. "Shame, you were prettier before." "But I suppose I can overlook it, given the circumstances." "Get away from me. You do not have many options, girl. You think you can make it alone. You are working at a trading post, living in a room that is barely fit for rats. I am offering you a home, security, everything a woman needs." "I would rather die." His face darkened. "Be careful what you wish for. This is a dangerous town for a woman alone." "Is that a threat?" "It is a warning." He stepped back, straightening his jacket. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, I will collect what I paid for one way or another." He walked away, and Virginia stood there shaking, her hands clenched into fists. She knew he meant it. Men like Richard Thornton always meant it. That night, she barely slept, jumping at every sound, the knife clutched in her hand. Dawn came as a relief, and she went to Mrs. Chen's restaurant with shadows under her eyes. "What happened?" Mrs. Chen asked immediately. Virginia told her, keeping her voice low so the other customers wouldn't hear. Mrs. Chen listened, her face growing more worried with each word. "You need protection," she said finally. "You need a man, a husband, someone who can stand against Thornton." "I won't marry someone just for protection. Not just for protection, for love too. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. This mountain man, Konrad Miller, he is the one paying for your meals, Virginia nodded, feeling her face flush. He cares for you. I can see it in the way he spoke of you, the way he made sure you would be fed, and you care for him. I barely know him. But you care, Virginia couldn't deny it. Yes. Then maybe you should know him better. He returns tomorrow. Yes. Then tomorrow you tell him about Thornton. Let him decide what to do. Virginia wanted to protest that she could handle her own problems, but the truth was she couldn't. Not this one. Thornton had money and power, and she had nothing. If Konrad was willing to help, she would be a fool to refuse. The next day, she finished the last stitches on Konrad's clothes and waited. The morning passed slowly, then the afternoon. She started to worry he wouldn't come, that something had happened in the mountains, that she'd imagined the connection between them. Then, just as the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, the bell chimed and he walked in. He looked different, Virginia thought. Wilder, somehow, his hair loose around his shoulders, his face more weathered. But his eyes were the same, that pale blue that seemed to see straight through her, and when he saw her they lit up with something warm and bright. Virginia, he said, and just her name in his voice made her feel safer. Your clothes are ready. Good. Show me. She brought out the shirts and pants and watched his face as he examined them. His hands moved over the fabric, testing the seams, checking the stitching, and she held her breath waiting for his verdict. These are perfect, he said finally. Better than perfect. You have real skill. Thank you. How much do I owe you for the labor? $2. I will pay you $8. That's too much. It is what they are worth. He counted out the money and added it to what she'd already been paid. And now you will tell me why you look so afraid. Virginia blinked. I am not afraid. You are lying again. He set down the clothes and moved closer to the counter, his eyes serious. What has happened? She told him everything. About her father, about Richard Thornton, about the threat and the weak deadline. Konrad listened without interrupting, but she could see the anger building in him, his jaw tightening, his hands curling into fists. When did he say this? He asked when she finished. 3 days ago. So you have 4 days left. Yes. Konrad was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he said, You will marry me. Virginia's heart stopped. What? You need protection. I can give you that. We will marry and then you will be my wife and he cannot touch you. You cannot marry me just to protect me. Why not? His eyes met hers, clear and honest. I came to town early. I have been in Castle Dome for 2 days, staying in the boarding house, watching to make sure you are safe. I saw Thornton follow you. I saw the way you look over your shoulder. I cannot leave you like this. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are strong and brave, and you make beautiful things with your hands. I know you survived something that would have broken a weaker person. I know that when I am in the mountains, I think about you. He reached across the counter and took her hand, his touch gentle despite his obvious anger. I know that the thought of someone hurting you makes me want to break things. Virginia stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I cannot ask you to give up your freedom for me. You are not asking, I am offering, and it is not giving up freedom, it is choosing a different life, one where you are in it. You want to marry me, truly, truly. His thumb stroked over her knuckles. Unless you do not want to marry me, then I will find another way to keep you safe. But I hope you will say yes. Virginia looked at their joined hands, at the way her small fingers disappeared into his large ones, at the calluses and scars that spoke of a hard life honestly lived. She thought about the past month, about the way he'd looked at her crooked nose and seen strength, about how he'd made sure she was fed, about the care she'd put into making his clothes. She thought about spending her life alone in a tiny room, always afraid, always struggling. versus spending it with this man who had somehow seen her when she'd felt invisible. "Yes," she whispered, "I will marry you." Konrad's face broke into a genuine smile, and it transformed him, made him look younger and happier and almost boyish despite his size. "Tomorrow, tomorrow," Virginia agreed. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so formal and sweet it made her want to cry. "Then I will stay in town tonight and make arrangements. You should stay with Mrs. Chen, yes. I do not like you sleeping here alone. I will ask her." "Good." He gathered his new clothes. "Tomorrow, Virginia Zimmerman, you will be Virginia Miller." After he left, Virginia stood in the empty trading post and tried to process what had just happened. She was getting married. Tomorrow. To a man she'd spoken to maybe 5 times. It was insane and impulsive and completely reckless. It was also the most right thing she'd felt in years. Mrs. Chen was delighted when Virginia asked to stay with her, and insisted on lending her a dress for the wedding, pale blue cotton with tiny white flowers. "You cannot marry in your work clothes," she said firmly. That night, Virginia lay in Mrs. Chen's spare room and thought about Konrad, about what it would mean to be his wife. She knew almost nothing about him, really. Where exactly he lived, what his life was like, what he did for pleasure or when he was sad. But she knew the important things, she told herself. She knew he was kind and honest and strong. She knew he'd looked at her crooked nose and kissed her hand and made her feel valuable. The wedding was simple, performed by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through Castle Dome. Konrad wore his new clothes and Virginia wore Mrs. Chen's blue dress, and they stood in the courthouse and made promises to love and honor each other. Konrad's hand was steady when he slid a simple silver band onto her finger, and his kiss when the judge pronounced them married was gentle and careful, like she was something precious. "My wife," he said softly, and Virginia felt tears slide down her cheeks. They had lunch at Mrs. Chen's restaurant, a celebratory meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, and then Konrad took Virginia to the boarding house where he'd been staying. "We will leave tomorrow," he said. "Go to my cabin in the mountains. But tonight we stay here so you can rest and prepare." Virginia nodded, suddenly nervous. She was married now, to this large man she barely knew, and she had no idea what he expected of her, what would happen when they were alone. Konrad seemed to sense her fear. "Virginia," he said gently, sitting beside her on the bed, "I will not hurt you, I will never hurt you, you understand?" "Yes." "Good, tonight we will sleep, just sleep. There is no rush for anything else. We have time to know each other, to be comfortable." "Yes." The relief that flooded through her was profound. "Yes." He smiled and touched her crooked nose, that same gentle touch as before. "You are so beautiful," he said. "This nose, it makes you perfect. Every time I see it, I will remember that you are strong enough to survive anything." Then he leaned forward and kissed her nose, right on the crooked bridge, his lips soft and warm against her skin. Virginia's breath caught. No one had ever done that before. Kissed the part of her she'd learned to be ashamed of, the part that marked her as damaged. But Konrad kissed it like it was something worthy of love, and something inside her that had been broken began to heal. That night, they lay side by side in the narrow boarding house bed, and Konrad held her hand while she fell asleep. Virginia dreamed of mountains and safety, and a man with pale blue eyes who saw beauty in imperfection. They left Castle Dome at dawn, Konrad leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, and Virginia riding a gentle mare he'd bought for her. The desert gave way gradually to foothills, and then to mountains, the air growing cooler and cleaner as they climbed. Virginia had never been out of Castle Dome, and everything was new and wonderful, the tall pines and the sound of running water and the sight of deer watching them from the shadows. "How far is your cabin?" she asked. Another 4 hours. It is remote, away from people. You will like it, I think. Will I be alone there while you trap? Sometimes. But I will teach you things, how to track, how to hunt, how to survive. You will never be helpless. Virginia liked the sound of that. She'd spent too much of her life dependent on others, on her father's approval, on Mr. Peterson's willingness to employ her. The idea of being capable, of having real skills, was appealing. They stopped for lunch by a stream, and Konrad caught fish with his bare hands, quick and sure in the cold water. He cooked them over a small fire, and they ate with their fingers, the meat sweet and tender. "Tell me about your family," Virginia said. "Where you came from." Konrad was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Austria," he said finally. "Small village in the mountains. My father was a hunter and I learned from him. But there was war and violence and I did not want that life. So I came to America to find peace and space." "Do you miss it, Austria?" "Sometimes. I miss my mother's cooking, but I do not miss the fighting, the anger. Here in these mountains I have found what I was looking for." "What is that?" He looked at her, his pale eyes serious. "Freedom, quiet, and now you." Virginia felt her heart flutter. "Did you ever think about marrying before? Before me?" "No. I thought I would be alone. I was content with that. But then I saw you in the trading post, and you had this nose that told a story and eyes that were trying to be brave, and I thought maybe alone is not what I want anymore." "I am glad you came into the trading post," Virginia said softly. "I am glad too." They reached the cabin in late afternoon, and Virginia caught her breath at the sight of it. It was larger than she'd expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. There was a small barn for the horses, a shed for supplies, and a garden patch that showed signs of recent tending. "You built this?" she asked. "Yes." "It took 2 years, working between trapping seasons." Inside, the cabin was neat and spare, with a large bed in one corner, a table and chairs, a stove for cooking, and shelves lined with supplies. There were furs on the floor for warmth and a few books on a shelf by the bed. It was simple, but it was clean and well made, and Virginia could see herself being happy here. "It is not much," Konrad said, sounding uncertain for the first time since she'd met him. "It is perfect," Virginia said honestly. "It is home." His face relaxed. "Good. Tomorrow I will show you everything, the stream, the trails where I trap. But tonight I will make dinner and you will rest." The ride was long. He was right. Virginia was exhausted, sore from hours on horseback, overwhelmed by everything that had changed in 24 hours. She sat at the table and watched Konrad move around the cabin, his movements efficient and practiced, and tried to believe this was real, that this was her life now. Dinner was venison stew, rich and hearty, with bread Konrad had bought in town. They ate together as the sun set beyond the windows, and Virginia felt a contentment she hadn't known she'd been missing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything? Why did you really marry me? Not just to protect me. The real reason." Konrad set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "Because when I saw you, something inside me recognized you. Like finding a place I did not know I was looking for. Because you are strong and do not complain, even when life is hard. Because your hands make beautiful things and your eyes are honest, and when you touch your crooked nose, I want to take your hand and tell you that you are perfect." He paused. "Because I think I could love you. Maybe I already do." Virginia's eyes filled with tears. "I think I could love you too," she whispered. "Then we will learn together," Konrad said. "How to love each other. There is no rush. We have time." That night they shared the large bed, and Konrad held her gently, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her. Virginia felt safe in a way she never had before, protected and valued and wanted. She fell asleep listening to his steady breathing and the sound of wind in the pines. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Konrad showed her the mountains, the trails and streams and hidden valleys he'd explored over the years. He taught her to track animals by their prints and scat, to identify edible plants, to shoot a rifle with accuracy. Virginia proved to be a quick learner, and she could see the pride in his eyes when she successfully tracked a rabbit to its warren or hit a target from 50 yards. "You are a natural," he said, and she glowed with the praise. In the evenings, they cooked together and talked, sharing stories of their lives. Virginia told him about her mother, about learning to sew, about the loneliness of her father's house after her mother died. Konrad told her about Austria, about his father teaching him to hunt, about crossing the ocean and making his way west. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Virginia learned that Konrad sang quietly to himself when he worked. Old songs in German she didn't understand, but found beautiful anyway. She learned that he had a sweet tooth and would trade anything for honey, that he was patient with animals but had no tolerance for cruelty, that he read the same 3 books over and over because they were the only ones he owned. Konrad learned that Virginia was afraid of spiders but not of bears, that she could stitch up a torn shirt almost invisibly, that she hummed while she cooked. He learned that she had nightmares sometimes about her father, and that, when she woke gasping and afraid, she needed him to hold her and tell her she was safe. 3 weeks after they arrived at the cabin, Konrad came back from checking his traps to find Virginia in the garden, weeding in the late afternoon sun. He stood at the edge of the clearing and watched her, this woman who had somehow become essential to him in such a short time, and felt his heart swell with something powerful and tender. "Virginia," he called. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun, and smiled. It was a real smile, open and happy, so different from the guarded expression she'd worn in the trading post. "Come here," he said. She stood and walked to him, wiping dirt from her hands. "What is it? I want to tell you something." He took her hands in his, dirt and all. "I love you. I am certain now. I love you, and I am grateful every day that I walked into that trading post and found you." Virginia's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she said. "I have for a while now. I was just afraid to say it." "Why afraid?" "Because it happened so fast. Because I thought maybe it was just gratitude or relief at being safe. But it is not. It is love." Konrad pulled her close and kissed her, not gentle this time but deep and passionate, his hands tangling in her hair, her body pressed against his. Virginia kissed him back with equal fervor, and when they finally broke apart they were both breathing hard. "Come inside," Konrad said, his voice rough. "Please." Virginia nodded, and he swept her up in his arms like she weighed nothing, carrying her into the cabin and kicking the door shut behind them. They made love for the first time in the afternoon sunlight, slow and tender and then urgent, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's minds. Konrad was gentle with her, always making sure she was comfortable, always watching her face to be sure he wasn't hurting her. Virginia gave herself to him completely, trusting him with everything she was, and it was better than anything she'd imagined. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the large bed, Konrad's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Virginia's back. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "What is it? When we first met, when you touched my nose, I thought about how everyone else looked at it and saw something broken, but you looked at it and saw strength. Because that is what it is. Yes, but I want you to know that it is not just my nose that was broken. It was me. All of me. And you have helped me heal, not just my face but my spirit. You have made me feel valuable again." Konrad's arms tightened around her. "You are valuable. You were valuable before you met me, but I am glad I can make you feel it." Do you really think my crooked nose makes me unique? I think everything about you makes you unique. But yes, your nose is part of that. It is part of your story, part of what shaped you. I would not change it, even if I could. Virginia turned in his arms to face him. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for wanting me, for loving me. Thank you for letting me, Konrad replied and kissed her crooked nose again, tender and sweet. The seasons changed, summer giving way to fall, and Virginia's life transformed completely. She was no longer a frightened girl living above a trading post, but a capable woman who could skin a rabbit and read weather patterns in the sky. She was a wife, loved and cherished, sharing her life with a man who made her laugh and feel safe and burn with desire. They went to Castle Dome together once a month for supplies, and Virginia saw the way people looked at her now, with Konrad beside her. Some were surprised, some envious, and a few were disapproving of how quickly they'd married. Virginia didn't care. She walked with her head high, Konrad's hand on her back, and felt proud of the life they were building. The third time they came to town, they saw Richard Thornton on the street. He stared at Virginia, at her simple dress and work-roughened hands, at the way she stood close to Konrad, and his face twisted with anger. "You married a savage," he called out, loud enough for others to hear. "A mountain man with no breeding, no money. You could have had a real life." Virginia felt Konrad tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand and stepped forward. "I have a real life," she said clearly. "I have a husband who loves me, who sees me as an equal, who has never raised his hand to me. I have a home and work that matters and respect. What you were offering was not a life. It was a cage." Thornton's face flushed red. "You think you are better than me now? No, I think I am free, and that is better than anything you could offer." She turned and walked away, Konrad beside her, and didn't look back. She heard Thornton shout something else, but the words didn't matter. He had no power over her anymore. "You handled that well," Konrad said when they were alone. "I had good motivation," Virginia replied, looking up at him. "I have something worth protecting now." Winter came early that year, snow falling thick and heavy in the mountains. Virginia had been worried about being isolated, about the cold and the darkness, but she found she loved it. There was something peaceful about being snowed in with Konrad, the cabin warm and cozy. Nothing to do but cook and read and talk and make love. They spent long evenings by the fire, Virginia sewing and Konrad carving wood, their legs tangled together, content in each other's company. Christmas came, and Konrad surprised her with a gift, a necklace he'd made from silver traded at the post, with a small pendant in the shape of a pine tree. "So you always remember your first winter in the mountains," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Virginia gave him a shirt she'd embroidered with his initials, and he wore it immediately, proud as if she'd given him gold. "I have never been this happy," she told him on Christmas night, curled against his chest in their warm bed while snow fell outside the window. "I did not know it was possible." "Neither did I," Konrad admitted, "but I am learning that happiness is easier when you have someone to share it with. Do you ever regret marrying me so quickly? Wonder if you made a mistake?" "Never." He tilted her face up to his. "You are the best decision I ever made. The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner." In January, Virginia realized she was pregnant. She'd missed her monthly courses twice now, and her breasts were tender, and she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. She told Konrad one evening after dinner, nervous about how he would react. His face went through several emotions in quick succession, surprise and wonder and joy, and then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Virginia, I am more than happy. I am blessed. You have given me everything." They spent the rest of the winter preparing. Konrad built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving designs into the headboard. Virginia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating impossibly small shirts and gowns. They talked about names and argued gently about whether it would be a boy or girl. "A girl," Virginia said. "With your eyes." "A boy," Konrad countered. "With your spirit." "We will love them either way," Virginia said, and Konrad nodded agreement. Spring came, and with it the baby. Virginia labored for most of a day, Konrad at her side, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. Mrs. Chen had come to stay with them for the birth, and she coached Virginia through the contractions and the pushing until finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced, laying the squirming infant on Virginia's chest. "Healthy and strong." Virginia looked down at her son, at his red face and tiny fists and dark hair, and felt love so powerful it stole her breath. Konrad leaned over them both, his large hand gently touching the baby's head, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" Virginia asked. They discussed names, but now that the baby was here, real and breathing and theirs, the decision felt more important. "What about Carl?" Konrad suggested. "It was my father's name." "Carl Miller," Virginia said, testing it. "I like it. Carl Michael Miller." "Michael for the middle, for the archangel, for protection and strength," Konrad nodded. "Carl Michael Miller, our son." The first months of Carl's life were exhausting and wonderful. Virginia had never been around babies much, and everything was new and sometimes overwhelming. But Konrad was a devoted father, happy to hold Carl when Virginia needed rest, patient with the crying and the constant demands. He fashioned a sling so Virginia could carry Carl while she worked, and he sang to his son in German, soft lullabies that made Carl's eyes droop with sleep. "You are a natural father," Virginia told him one evening, watching him rock Carl by the fire. "I am learning," Konrad said. "Same as I learned to be a husband. You are a good teacher. I am not teaching you anything. You teach me by example. You show me how to love without fear, how to be patient, how to find joy in small things. These are important lessons." Virginia crossed to him and kissed the top of his head. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too, both of you, more than I have words for." Carl grew quickly, a robust baby with his father's appetite and his mother's stubbornness. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, and Virginia spent her days chasing after him and trying to keep him from danger. Konrad built a fence around the garden so Carl could play safely outside, and he made wooden toys, simple animals and blocks that Carl loved. They went to Castle Dome less often now, finding it easier to stay in the mountains where life was simpler. But when they did go, people commented on how healthy Carl looked, how happy Virginia seemed, how devoted Konrad was. "You are lucky," one woman told Virginia at the trading post. "Most men would not help with a baby." "Konrad is not most men," Virginia replied and meant it. On a warm day in June, when Carl was 14 months old, they had a picnic by the stream near the cabin. Virginia spread a blanket and unpacked food while Konrad helped Carl splash in the shallow water, both of them laughing at the cold and the spray. Virginia watched them, her husband and her son, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Konrad looked up and caught her watching. "What are you thinking?" he called. "That I am happy," Virginia called back. "That this is everything I wanted even when I did not know I wanted it." He waded out of the stream, Carl in his arms, and came to sit beside her on the blanket. Carl immediately grabbed a piece of bread and stuffed it in his mouth, crumbs going everywhere. "You ever think about that day in the trading post?" Konrad asked. "When we first met? All the time." What do you think would have happened if I had not come in? If we had not met? Virginia considered it. I do not know. Maybe I would have found a way to survive. Maybe Thornton would have made good on his threats. Maybe I would have left Castle Dome and gone somewhere else. I am glad I came in, Konrad said softly. I am glad I saw you. I am glad I had the courage to speak to you, to offer what I could. I am glad, too. Virginia reached up and touched his face, this face she knew so well now, every line and scar and expression. You saved me, you know. No. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to land. Maybe we saved each other. Konrad smiled and leaned in to kiss her, gentle and sweet, while Carl babbled happily between them. When they pulled apart, Konrad's hand came up to trace the bridge of Virginia's nose, that familiar gesture she'd come to love. My beautiful wife, he said, with your crooked nose and your strong heart. You really still think it makes me unique? I know it does. Every time I see it, I remember that you are brave enough to survive anything, strong enough to build a new life, capable of loving even when you have been hurt. That is what your crooked nose tells me. Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 2 years together, his words could still move her, still make her feel seen and valued in a way nothing else could. I love you, she said. I love you too. Always. That night, after Carl was asleep in his cradle, Virginia and Konrad lay in bed together, her head on his chest, his fingers playing with her hair. You want more children? Virginia asked. If you do. I think I do, maybe a daughter next time. A daughter would be good. We could name her after your mother. Sarah, Virginia said, remembering. My mother's name was Sarah. Sarah Miller, it is a good name. They fell asleep planning their future, talking about the children they might have, the life they would build. And Virginia thought about how different everything had turned out from what she'd imagined. She'd thought she would marry for safety, for protection from Thornton and the harsh world she lived in. Instead, she'd found love, real and deep and lasting, with a man who saw beauty in her brokenness. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with dark hair and her mother's nose, straight and perfect. They named her Sarah Virginia Miller, and Carl, now 3.5, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help care for her. Gentle, Virginia reminded him constantly. She is small and fragile, like Mama was, Carl asked, and Virginia blinked in surprise. What do you mean? Papa said you were small and needed help when he found you, and now you are strong. Will Sarah be strong too? Virginia looked at Konrad, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed at having been caught telling stories. Yes, Virginia said. Sarah will be strong, and so will you, because we will teach you both to be strong, to be kind, to stand up for what is right. And to love each other, Konrad added. That is the most important thing. Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The cabin felt smaller, fuller, louder, and infinitely more precious. Konrad expanded the cabin, adding a loft space for when the children were older, and Virginia planted a larger garden to feed their growing family. They were busy constantly, but happy in a way that felt permanent and unshakable. When Sarah was 2 and Carl was 5, they made the trip to Castle Dome and ran into Mr. Peterson at the trading post. Virginia, he said, looking surprised and pleased. I had wondered what became of you. I got married, Virginia said, gesturing to Konrad and the children. This is my family. Mr. Peterson looked at Konrad, at the 2 children, at Virginia's work-worn hands and sun-browned skin, and nodded slowly. You look happy, he said. I am. I am glad. You deserved happiness after everything. He paused. Your father came looking for you, must have been 3 years ago now. I told him I did not know where you had gone. Virginia felt Konrad tense beside her, but she stayed calm. Thank you for that. He looked bad, Virginia. Sick. I heard he died last winter." Virginia waited for some feeling, sadness or relief or anger, but there was nothing. Just a faint sense of closure, of a door closing on a part of her life she no longer needed. "I am sorry to hear that," she said, because it seemed like the right thing to say. "Are you, though?" Mr. Peterson asked gently. "No," Virginia admitted. "Not really. He made his choices and I made mine. I am only sorry that we could not have had a better relationship." After they left the trading post, Konrad asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes, I thought I would feel something, but I do not. He is part of my past, and my past is over. I have my present and my future, and both are with you." Konrad pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You are remarkable, you know that. I am just doing what you taught me, moving forward." The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Carl grew tall and strong like his father, with the same pale eyes and easy confidence. Sarah was smaller and quicker, always climbing trees and exploring, with a curiosity that sometimes terrified Virginia. They had a third child when Sarah was 4, another boy they named Thomas, and then a fourth 2 years after that, a daughter named Elizabeth. The cabin was chaotic and loud and full of laughter. Virginia spent her days cooking and cleaning and teaching the children their letters and numbers. Konrad spent his days trapping and hunting and teaching the children to track and shoot and survive in the wilderness. In the evenings, they all gathered around the table for dinner, sharing stories and jokes and plans. "We are building a legacy," Konrad said one night after the children were asleep. 4 children who will grow up knowing they are loved, knowing they are capable, knowing they can survive anything." "Like their parents," Virginia said. "Yes, like their parents." When Virginia turned 30, Konrad surprised her with a trip to town, just the two of them, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to them all. "We need time together," he said. "Just us, to remember who we were before we were parents." They stayed at the boarding house, the same one where they'd spent their wedding night, and had dinner at Mrs. Chen's restaurant, and walked through the streets of Castle Dome as the sun set. It felt strange and wonderful to be alone together, to talk without interruption, to hold hands without a child tugging on their arms. "You remember our wedding?" Virginia asked. "Every detail. You wore a blue dress with flowers. You were so nervous you could barely stand still. I thought you might run away. I thought about it," Virginia admitted with a laugh, "for about half a second, and then you smiled at me, and I knew I was exactly where I needed to be." "I knew the moment I saw you in the trading post," Konrad said, "with your crooked nose and your brave eyes. I knew you were going to change my life." "Did I change it for the better?" "Virginia, you made my life. Before you, I was just existing, just surviving. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something permanent." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands cupping her face. "You are my everything. You and the children. I need you to know that." "I do know it," Virginia said softly. "And you are my everything too. You took a broken girl and helped her become a strong woman. You looked at my crooked nose and saw beauty instead of damage. You gave me safety and love and a family. How could I not know that you are my everything?" They kissed there in the street, not caring who saw, and Virginia felt the same flutter in her chest she'd felt on their wedding day, that sense of coming home, of being exactly where she belonged. That night, they made love slowly and tenderly, relearning each other's bodies, whispering promises and confessions in the dark. And when Virginia woke in the morning to see Konrad watching her with love in his eyes, she reached up to touch her crooked nose and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Konrad asked. "That I used to hate this nose. I used to look in the mirror and see only the damage, only what my father had done to me. But now when I look at it, I think about you. I think about how you kissed it and called it unique. I think about how it led me to you, to this life. And I am grateful for it. Good, Konrad said. Because I love that nose, I love everything about you. They returned to the cabin and their children, and life continued its beautiful, chaotic rhythm. The children grew older, became more capable, started helping with chores and hunting and cooking. Carl, at 12, shot his first deer and was so proud he could barely contain himself. Sarah, at 9, learned to sew from her mother and made her first dress, crooked and uneven but worn with fierce pride. Thomas and Elizabeth were still young, 6 and 4, but already showing signs of the people they would become. Virginia watched them all and marveled at how her life had turned out. She'd gone from a frightened girl with no options to a woman with a family, a home, skills, and purpose. She'd found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who had seen past her broken nose to the person beneath. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Konrad took Virginia to the spot where they'd had their picnic all those years ago, when Carl was just a baby. It was summer, warm and green, and the stream burbled pleasantly in the background. "Do you remember what you said to me that first time you touched my nose?" Virginia asked. "I said it was not so bad, that the crookedness made you unique. You said it showed strength, that it said I survived, that I chose myself." Virginia turned to face him. "That was the moment I started to fall in love with you, when you looked at the worst thing that had happened to me and saw it as proof of my strength." "It was the truth," Konrad said simply. "It is still the truth. I know, and I want you to know that you were right. I did survive. I did choose myself, and then I chose you, and every day since I have been grateful for that choice." Konrad pulled her close, and Virginia rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he said. "I will always love you. You and your crooked nose and your strong spirit and your beautiful heart." "I love you too," Virginia replied. "Always." They stood there together, holding each other in the mountain sunshine, and Virginia thought about the journey that had brought her here. From her father's house to the trading post, to this mountain clearing with a man who loved her and children, who filled her life with joy. From broken to healed, from afraid to brave, from alone to cherished. It had started with a crooked nose and a mountain man who saw beauty in imperfection. It had become a love story, a family, a life worth living, and Virginia Zimmerman Miller, standing in her husband's arms with her children's laughter echoing from the cabin, knew without question that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to flow like the stream by their cabin, steady and sure. The children grew into young adults, each carrying pieces of their parents in their faces and hearts. Carl became a skilled hunter like his father, tall and strong with Konrad's patience and Virginia's determination. At 18, he started talking about building his own cabin on the far side of the valley, wanting independence but not wanting to stray too far from his family. Sarah, at 15, was already an accomplished seamstress, her stitches even finer than her mother's. She talked about opening a dress shop in Castle Dome someday, but Virginia suspected she'd stay close to the mountains. The wild places had gotten into her daughter's blood the same way they'd gotten into her own. Thomas and Elizabeth were 12 and 10 now, still children but growing fast, already showing the independence and capability that came from being raised in the wilderness. They could track and hunt and survive, but they also knew how to read and write and do mathematics. Virginia and Konrad had made sure their children would have choices, would be able to make their way in either the wild places or the towns. On a cool autumn evening, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, the cabin full of talk and laughter and the good smell of venison stew. Virginia looked around at all of them, at the life she and Konrad had built, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. "What is it, Mama?" Sarah asked, noticing her expression. "I am just happy," Virginia said. "Looking at all of you, at this life we have. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "Tell us the story again," Elizabeth begged, "about how you and Papa met." It was a story the children never tired of hearing, and Virginia glanced at Konrad, who nodded with a slight smile. "Your papa walked into the trading post where I was working," Virginia began. "I was alone and afraid, and I had just been hit by my father. My nose was healing crooked, and I thought it made me ugly, made me damaged. But Papa did not think so," Thomas chimed in. He'd heard this story dozens of times. "No, he did not. He looked at my nose and saw strength. He saw survival. And later he kissed it and told me it made me unique." "That is when you knew you loved him?" Sarah asked. "That is when I started to know," Virginia corrected. "Love takes time to grow, to become strong enough to last. But yes, that was the beginning." "And then he married you to protect you from the bad man," Elizabeth added. "He did. But not just to protect me. Because he loved me even though he barely knew me. Because he saw something in me worth loving." "Because you are worth loving, Mama," Carl said seriously. "Anyone can see that." Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart." After dinner, after the children had gone to bed, Virginia and Konrad sat together on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. The stars were bright overhead, the forest dark and quiet around them. "Do you think we did it right?" Virginia asked. "Raising them, I think we did the best we could," Konrad replied. "We loved them, taught them, gave them tools to survive and thrive. That is all any parent can do. They are good people, all of them, because they had good parents." Konrad pulled her closer. "You are a wonderful mother, Virginia, and a wonderful wife. I am so grateful I walked into that trading post 14 years ago." 14 years, Virginia marveled. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Some days I still see that frightened girl with the fresh broken nose. Other days, all I see is the strong woman you have become." Virginia touched her nose, the gesture automatic after all these years. The crookedness was as much a part of her face as her eyes or mouth, something she no longer noticed unless she thought about it. "I am not ashamed of it anymore," she said. "My crooked nose. For a long time I was, but you taught me to see it differently. I am glad. It is part of your story, part of what makes you who you are. It is the reason I left my father's house. If he had not hit me, if he had not broken my nose, I might have stayed. I might have married Richard Thornton out of fear or obligation. I would never have been in that trading post when you came in." "Then I am grateful for your crooked nose too," Konrad said, pressing a kiss to it, just as he had countless times over the years, "because it brought you to me." Virginia laughed and turned to kiss him properly, on the mouth, deep and sweet. After 14 years of marriage, the passion between them had not dimmed, had only grown deeper and more complex, layered with years of shared experiences and mutual respect. "Take me to bed, husband," she whispered against his lips. "Always, wife," he replied, and swept her up in his arms, carrying her inside as easily as he had on their wedding night. The next few years brought more changes. Carl did build his cabin on the far side of the valley. And at 20, he married a girl from Castle Dome, a quiet young woman named Emma who loved the mountains as much as he did. Virginia and Konrad helped them build their home, and Virginia cried happy tears at their wedding, seeing her oldest child start his own life. Sarah, at 17, did open her dress shop in Castle Dome, but she lived with Mrs. Chen and came home to the mountains every few weeks. She was courted by several young men, but none of them seemed to meet her high standards, and Virginia suspected her daughter was waiting for something specific, some connection that mattered. Thomas and Elizabeth were still at home, now 15 and 13, helping with chores and starting to think about their own futures. Thomas talked about becoming a guide, leading hunting parties into the mountains. Elizabeth wanted to be a teacher, to help other children learn to read and write. "They all know what they want," Virginia said to Konrad one evening. "How did we raise such certain children?" "We gave them options," Konrad replied. "We taught them they could be anything, do anything. And we showed them what a good life looks like, what love looks like. That gives them confidence to choose." When Virginia turned 35, she realized she was pregnant again. It was unexpected, unplanned, but not unwelcome. Her body was older now, more tired, but still capable, still strong. "Another baby," she told Konrad, and saw joy light his face. "We are blessed," he said, his hand on her stomach. "So very blessed." This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Virginia was sick more often, tired more easily. But Konrad was there every step of the way, taking on extra work, making sure she rested, rubbing her aching back and swollen feet. Thomas and Elizabeth helped too, taking over cooking and cleaning, and Virginia felt surrounded by love and support. The baby, another boy, was born on a warm spring evening, and they named him James. He was smaller than his siblings had been, more delicate, and Virginia worried over him constantly. But he thrived, growing stronger each day, and by his first birthday he was crawling everywhere and getting into everything just like his siblings before him. "Our surprise blessing," Konrad called him, and James became the darling of the family, spoiled by his older siblings who were all old enough to appreciate the wonder of a new baby. Life was full and busy and sometimes exhausting, but Virginia would not have changed anything. She had gone from a woman with nothing to a woman with everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, and respect. One day, when James was 3 and Virginia was 38, she and Konrad were working in the garden together, their hands in the dirt, comfortable in the silence that came from years of companionship. Virginia looked at her husband, at the silver now threading through his dark hair, at the deeper lines around his eyes, and felt a wave of love so strong it took her breath away. "What is it?" Konrad asked, noticing her stare. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am. How different my life could have been. You made your own luck. You chose to leave your father to work hard to survive. You chose to marry me. You made it easy to choose you," Virginia said. "From that very first day when you looked at my broken nose and saw beauty instead of damage. You have always seen me clearly, Konrad, all of me, not just the parts that are easy to love." "There are no parts of you that are not easy to love," Konrad said seriously. "But I know what you mean. You see me clearly too. You see the man I am, not the man I was afraid I would become." "Who were you afraid you would become?" "Alone, angry, shut off from the world." He reached for her hand, dirt and all. "You opened my heart, Virginia. You made me want more than just survival. You made me want a life." They sat there in the garden, holding hands, surrounded by the vegetables they had planted and the mountains they called home, and Virginia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with violence, with a father's fist and a broken nose. It had continued with fear and struggle and uncertainty, but it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something worth every hardship along the way. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, if it meant ending up here with you." "As would I," Konrad replied, 1,000 times over. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Carl and Emma had 3 children of their own, making Virginia and Konrad grandparents. Sarah finally met a man who met her standards, a carpenter from Castle Dome who appreciated her independence and skill. And they married in a simple ceremony that Virginia helped plan. Thomas became a renowned guide, known throughout Arizona for his tracking skills and his ability to keep people safe in the wilderness. Elizabeth did become a teacher, opening a small school in Castle Dome where she taught children of all ages, from miners' kids to ranchers' daughters. James grew into a thoughtful, artistic boy who loved to draw the mountains and animals he saw around him. Konrad encouraged this talent, trading furs for paper and pencils, and Virginia would find her youngest son sitting for hours, sketching the world around him with careful concentration. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Virginia was 42 and Konrad was 48. They looked older now, weathered by years of sun and wind and hard work, but they moved together with the ease of long practice, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with looks and gestures that needed no words. The whole family gathered at the cabin to celebrate, children and grandchildren filling the space to bursting. There was food and laughter and music, and Virginia stood back and watched it all with wonder. "What are you thinking, Mama?" Sarah asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I am so grateful for all of this, for all of you. We are grateful too. You and Papa gave us an incredible childhood, an incredible life. We all know how lucky we are. Do you remember the story I used to tell you, about how your Papa and I met, of course? He walked into the trading post and saw past your broken nose to the strong woman beneath. He kissed my crooked nose and told me it made me unique," Virginia added softly. "That was the moment everything changed. That was when I understood that someone could love me exactly as I was, damage and all." Sarah hugged her mother tight. "He was right. You are unique and strong and beautiful. We all think so." Later that night, after everyone had left and the cabin was quiet again, Konrad found Virginia standing on the porch, looking at the stars. 20 years, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. 20 years, Virginia repeated. "The best 20 years of my life. Mine too." He kissed the top of her head. "I never imagined I could be this happy. I never imagined I would have a wife I adored, children and grandchildren, a life that mattered." "You gave me all of that too," Virginia said. "You gave me safety and love and a reason to believe in myself." "We gave it to each other." Virginia turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his weathered face. "Do you still think my crooked nose makes me unique?" "Every day," Konrad said. "Every single day I look at you and see the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. And your nose reminds me of how lucky I am that you survived, that you chose yourself, that you were in that trading post when I walked in." "Kiss it," Virginia whispered. "Like you did that first time." Konrad leaned in and pressed his lips to the bridge of her nose, to the slight crookedness that had once been a source of shame and had become a symbol of survival and strength. His kiss was tender and reverent, full of 20 years of love and devotion. "My Virginia," he murmured. "My strong, beautiful wife with the crooked nose that brought her to me." "Your Virginia," she agreed. "Always and forever." They stood there together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family from nothing but determination and love. Virginia touched her crooked nose one more time, feeling the familiar bump, and smiled. It had started with violence, this life of hers, with a father's anger and a bone that healed wrong. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something precious beyond measure. Her crooked nose had led her to Konrad Miller, to love and safety, and a family that filled her heart to bursting. And as she stood in her husband's arms, listening to the wind in the pines and feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, Virginia Zimmerman Miller knew without question that she would not change a single thing, not even her crooked nose, especially not her crooked nose. Because it had brought her home. The last years of their story were gentle and sweet, full of grandchildren and quiet days and the deep contentment that came from a life well lived. Virginia's hair turned silver, and Konrad's body grew stiffer with age, but they still walked hand in hand through the mountains they loved, still shared the same bed and the same dreams. On Virginia's 50th birthday, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, she looked around at the crowded cabin and felt tears of joy slide down her cheeks. "Why are you crying, Grandma?" one of Carl's daughters asked. "Because I am happy," Virginia said. "Because I am so very, very happy." That night, she and Konrad lay in bed together, their bodies familiar and comfortable after 28 years of marriage. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Virginia asked. "Our wedding night. I said I would never hurt you. That we had time to know each other, to be comfortable. You kept that promise. You have never hurt me, not once in all these years." "You made it easy to keep," Konrad said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Virginia. I want you to always know that." "I do know it. Just as I hope you know that you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They fell asleep together, holding each other, and Virginia's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she was grateful. Grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy. Grateful for the crooked nose that had set her on this path. Grateful for the mountain man who had seen past it to the woman beneath. And in the morning, when she woke to see Konrad watching her with love in his pale blue eyes, she reached up to touch her crooked nose and smiled, knowing it was the bridge that had brought her to this perfect life. "Good morning, beautiful," Konrad said. "Good morning, my love," Virginia replied. And it was a good morning and a good life, and a love story that had started with a crooked nose and a mountain man's kiss had become something legendary, something their children and grandchildren would tell for generations to come. The story of Virginia Zimmerman and Konrad Miller, who found each other in a trading post in Castle Dome, Arizona in 1874, and built a love that lasted forever. The end.